The effects of Rasselas and of Johnson's other moral tales is thus beautifully illustrated by Mr. Courtenay. Impressive truth in splendid fiction dressed checks the vain wish and calms the troubled breast. O'er the dark mind a light celestial throws, and soothes the angry passion to repose. As oil diffused illumes and smooths the deep, when round the bark the swelling surges sweep. Now, that was a very short little passage from Mr. Courtenay, but I will now read a very fucking long footnote about that passage. Oh wait, no I won't. Whew. Thank God. It's the footnotes for the next thing I'm about to say. It will be recollected that during all this year, Johnson carried on his idler, and no doubt was proceeding, though slowly, in his edition of Shakespeare. Now comes a very long footnote. The idler was not in such high estimation before it was collected into volumes that it was seized. Maybe I should start over. I read that wrong as well. This paper, the Idler, was in such high estimation before it was collected into volumes that it was seized on with avidity by various publishers of newspapers and magazines to enrich their publications. Johnson, to put a stop to the unfair proceeding, wrote for the Universal Chronicle the following advertisement, in which there is perhaps more pomp of words than the occasion demanded. London, January 5th, 1759. Advertisement. The proprietors of the paper entitled The Idler, having found that those essays are inserted in the newspapers and magazines with so little regard to justice or decency that the Universal Chronicle, in which that they first appear, is not always mentioned, think it necessary to declare to the publishers of these collections that, however patiently they have hitherto endured these injuries, made yet more injurious by contempt, they have now determined to endure them no longer. They have already seen essays, for which a very large price is paid, transferred with the most shameless rapacity into the weekly or monthly compilations, and their right, at least for their present, alienated from them before they could themselves be said to enjoy it. But they would not willingly be thought to want tenderness, even for men by whom no tenderness hath been shown. The past is without remedy, and shall be without resentment. But those who have been thus busy with their sickles in the fields of their neighbors are henceforward to take notice that the time of impunity is at an end. Whoever shall, without our leave, lay the hand of rapine upon our papers, is to expect that we shall vindicate our due by the means which of honorable trade. We shall lay hold in our turn on their copies, degrade them from the pomp of wide margin and diffuse typography, contract them to a narrow space, and sell them at a humble price, yet not with a view of growing rich by confiscations. For we think not much better of money got by punishment than by crimes. We shall, therefore, when our losses are repaid, give what profit shall remain to the Magdalens. For we know not who can be more properly taxed for the support of penitent prostitutes than prostitutes in whom there yet appear neither penitence nor shame. Wow. Good thing about plagiarism, huh? All right, I'm still on page 1 of today. Johnson, however, from that liberality which never failed, when called upon to assist other laborers in literature, found time to translate for Mrs. Lennox's English version of Bramoi a dissertation on the Greek comedy and the general conclusion of the book. An inquiry into the state of foreign countries was an object that seemed at all times to have interested Johnson. Hence, Mr. Newberry found no great difficulty in persuading him to write the introduction to a collection of voyages and travels published by under the title of The World Displayed, the first volume of which appeared this year, and the remaining volumes in subsequent years. I would ascribe to this year the following letter to a son of one of his early friends in Lichfield, Mr. Joseph Simpson, barrister, and author of a tract entitled Reflections on the Study of the Law. To Joseph Simpson, Esquire. Dear Sir, your father's inexorability not only grieves but amazes me. He is your father. He was always accounted a wise man, nor do I remember anything to the disadvantage of his good nature. But in his refusal to assist you there is neither good nature, fatherhood, nor wisdom. It is the practice of good nature to overlook faults which have already, by the consequences, punished the delinquent. It is natural for a father to think more favorably than others of his children, and it is always wise to give assistance while a little help will prevent the necessity of greater. If you married imprudently, you married, at your own hazard, at an age when you have a right of choice. It would be hard if the man might not choose his own wife, who has a right to plead before the judges of his country. If your imprudence has ended in difficulties and inconveniences, you are yourself to support them, and with the help of a little better health, you would support them and conquer them. Surely, that want which accident and sickness produces is to be supported in every region of humanity, though there were neither friends nor fathers in the world. You have certainly from your father the highest claim of charity, though none of the right. And therefore I would counsel you to admit no decency nor manly degree of importunity. Your debts in the whole are not large, and of the whole but a small part is troublesome. Small debts are like small shot. They are rattling on every side and can scarcely be escaped without a wound. Great debts are like cannon, of loud noise but little danger. You must, therefore, be enabled to discharge petty debts, that you may have leisure with security to struggle with the rest. Neither the great nor little debts disgrace you. I am sure you have my esteem for the courage with which you contracted them, and the spirit for which you endure them. I wish my esteem could be of more use. I have been invited, or have invited myself, to several parts of the kingdom, and will not incommode my dear Lucy by coming to Lichfield, which, while her present lodging is of any use to her. I hope in a few days to be at leisure and to make visits. Whither I shall fly is a matter of no importance. A man unconnected is at home everywhere, unless he may be said to be at home nowhere. I am sorry, dear sir, that where you have parents, a man of your merits should not have a home. I wish I could give it to you. I am, my dear sir, affectionately yours, Sam Johnson. Well, I was kind of dozing off towards most of that, but the ending seemed pretty nice. Johnson now refreshed himself by an excursion to Oxford, of which the following short characteristical notice in his own words is preserved. There are three weird asterisks at the beginning of this, with a footnote from somebody else saying, perhaps Van, i.e. Robert Vansittart. Okay. So the name is blacked out, but that's probably who he's talking about. Vansittart is now making tea for me. I have been in my gown ever since I came here. It was, at my first coming, quite new and handsome. I have swum thrice, which I had disused for many years. I have proposed to Vansittart climbing over the wall, but he has refused me. And we have a footnote here. Dr. Robert Vanestart, of the ancient and respectable family of that name in Berkshire. He was eminent for learning and worth, and much esteemed by Dr. Johnson. Johnson continues, and I have clapped my hands till they are sore as Dr. King's speech. At Dr. King's speech. His Negro servant, Francis Barber, who we will hear about later, or we have heard about, having left him and been some time at sea, not pressed as has been supposed, but with his own consent, it appears from a letter to John Wilkes, Esquire, from Dr. Smollett, that his master kindly interested himself in procuring his release from a state of life of which Johnson always expressed the utmost abhorrence. Johnson said, no man will be a sailor who has contrivance enough to get himself into jail, for being in a ship is being in jail with the chance of being drowned. And at another time, a man in jail has more room, better food, and commonly better company. This letter was as follows. Now, who's this letter to? I think this letter is from John Wilkes to Dr. Smollett. I don't think it's from Johnson, but I could be mistaken. Anyway, this letter is to T. Smollett. Chelsea, March 16, 1759. Dear Sir, I am again your petitioner on behalf of the great Cham of literature, Samuel Johnson. Okay, yeah, so this is from John Wilkes. His black servant, whose name is Francis Barber, has been pressed on board the Stag frigate, Captain Angel, and our lexicographer, you know what I mean, lexicographer, can't pronounce it right now, is in great distress. He says the boy is a sickly lad, of a delicate frame, and particularly subject to a malady in his throat, which renders him very unfit for his Majesty's service. You know what manner of animosity the said Johnson has against you, and I dare say you desire no other opportunity of resenting it than that of laying him under an obligation. He was humble enough to desire my assistance on this occasion, though he and I were never cater cousins, and I gave him to understand that I would make application to my friend Mr. Wilkins, who, perhaps by his interest with Dr. Hay and Mr. Elliot, might be able to procure the discharge of his lackey. It would be superfluous to say more on the subject, which I leave to your own consideration. But I cannot let slip this opportunity of declaring that I am, with the most inviolable esteem and attachment, Sir, your affectionate, obliged, humble servants, T. Smollett. Oh, okay, duh. So that letter was written by T. Smollett. I'm not doing too good tonight. So that letter was to John Wilkes, Esquire, from T. Smollett. I'm sorry, I'm tired today. Footnote here about this letter from I don't think it's from Boswell, from somebody else, another editor. In my first edition, this word was printed chum, as it appears in one of Mr. Wilkes's miscellanies, and I animadverted it on Dr. Smollett's ignorance, for which let me propitiate the manes of the ingenious and benevolent gentleman. So this is when I said earlier, the great Cham of literature, Samuel Johnson. So this guy originally changed that to Chum. But Chum was certainly a mistaken reading for Cham, the title of the sovereign of Tartary, which is well applied to Johnson, the monarch of literature, and was an epithet familiar to Smollett. See Roderick Random, chapter 56. For this correction I am indebted to Lord Palmerton, whose talents and literary acquaintance accord well with the respectable pedigree of Temple. Boswell. After the publication of the second edition of this work, the author was furnished by Mr. Abercrombie of Philadelphia with a copy of a letter written by Dr. John Armstrong, the poet, to Dr. Smollett at Leidenhorn, containing the following paragraph. As to the K. Bench Patriot, it is hard to say from what motive he published a letter of yours asking some trifling favor of him in behalf of somebody for whom the great sham of literature, Mr. Johnson, had interested himself. Okay, so there were two footnotes there. One was from Boswell, the second one was from a later editor. Sorry for the confusion. Doesn't really matter, does it? None of this, so who cares? Anyway, moving on. The whole point of that story was that Johnson asked somebody to help get his ex-slave servant off a boat that he had been basically shanghaied into serving for the British, I guess. Moving on. Mr. Wilkes, who upon all occasions had acted as a private gentleman with most polite liberality, applied to his friend Sir George Hay, then one of the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, and Francis Barber was discharged, as he has told me, without any wish of his own. He found his old master in chambers in the inner temple and returned to his service. So there's a happy ending to that story. What particular new scheme of life Johnson had in view this year, 1759, I have not discovered. But that he meditated one of some sort is clear from his private devotions, in which we find the charge of outward things which I am not now to make. I am now to make, to quote Johnson. And grant me, to quote Johnson again, grant me the grace of the Holy Spirit that the course which I am now beginning may proceed according to the laws, thy laws, and end in the enjoyment of thy favor. But he did not, in fact, make any external or visible change. At this time, there being a competition among the architects of London to be employed in the building of Blackfriars Bridge, a question was very warmly agitated whether semicircular or elliptical arches were preferable. In the design offered by Mr. Milne, the elliptical form was adopted, and therefore it was the great object of his rivals to attack it. Johnson's regard for his friend, Mr. Gwynne, induced him to engage in this controversy against Mr. Milne, and after being at considerable pains to study the subject, he wrote three several letters in the Gazetteer in opposition to his plan. Quote here, a footnote here. I believe we will be once again finding a very long footnote, actually. It runs 2 pages. And I believe it will be, once again, Boswell disrespecting Sir John Hawkins, which is kind of fun. So, and Sir John Hawkins has given a long detail of it, this controversy between Johnson and Mr. Milne, in that manner vulgarly but significantly called rigmarole, in which, amidst an ostentatious exhibition of arts and artists, he talks of, to quote, proportions of a column being taken from that of the human figure and adjusted by nature, masculine and feminine, in a man sesquitive of the head, and in a woman sesquional. Nor has he failed to introduce a jargon of musical terms which do not seem much to correspond with the subject, but serve to make up the heterogeneous mass. To follow the night through all of this would be an useless fatigue to myself, and not a little disgusting to my readers. I shall, therefore, only make a few remarks upon his statement. I believe he's referring here to Hawkins. Hawkins seems to exult in having detected Johnson in procuring, quote, from a person eminently skilled in mathematics and the principles of architecture, answers to a string of questions drawn up by himself touching the comparative strengths of semicircular and elliptical arches, end quote. Now I cannot conceive how Johnson could have acted more wisely. Sir John complains that the opinion of that excellent mathematician, Mr. Thomas Simpson, did not preponderate in favor of the semicircular arch. But he should have known that however eminent Mr. Simpson was in the higher parts of abstract mathematical science, he was little versed in mixed and practical mathematics. Or mechanics, rather. Mr. Muller of Woolwich Academy, the scholastic father of all the great engineers which this country has employed for 40 years, decided the question by declaring clearly in favor of the elliptical arch. It is ungraciously suggested that Johnson's motive for opposing Mr. Milne's scheme may have been his prejudice against him as a native of North Britain, when in truth, as has been stated, he gave the aid of his able pen to a friend who was one of the candidates, and so far was he from having any illiberal antipathy to Mr. Milne that he afterwards lived with that gentleman upon very agreeable terms of acquaintance, and dined with him at his house. Sir John Hawkins, indeed, gives full vent to his own prejudice in abusing Blackfriars Bridge, calling it, to quote, an edifice in which beauty and symmetry are in vain sought for, by which the citizens of London have perpetuated their own disgrace and subjected a whole nation to the reproach of foreigners. End quote. Whoever has contemplated Placido Lumine, the stately, elegant, and airy structure, which has so fine an effect, especially on approaching the capital on that quarter, must wonder of such unjust and ill-tempered censure. And I appeal to all foreigners of good taste, whether this bridge be not one of the most distinguished ornaments of London. As to the stability of the fabric, it is certain that the city of London took every precaution to have the best Portland stone for it, but as this is to be found in the quarries belonging to the public, under the direction of the Lords of the Treasury, it so happened that parliamentary interest, which is often the bane of fair pursuits, thwarted their endeavors. Notwithstanding this disadvantage, it is well known that not only has Blackfriars Bridge never sunk either in its foundation or in its arches, which were so much the subject of contest, but any injuries which it has suffered from the effects of severe frost have been already, in some measure, repaired with sounder stone, and every necessary renewal can be completed at a moderate expense. Well, there was a big footnote about the stupid bridge. If it should be remarked that this was a controversy which lay quite out of Johnson's way, let it be remembered that, after all, his employing his powers of reasoning and eloquence upon a subject which he had studied at the moment is not more strange than what we often observe in lawyers who, quidquid agunt hominis, as a manner of lawsuits, are sometimes obliged to pick up a temporary knowledge of an art of science of which they understood nothing till their brief was delivered, and appeared to be much masters of it. In like manner, members of the legislative frequently introduce and expatiate upon subjects of which they have informed themselves for the occasion. Well, fucking finally done with that here. So that was when Johnson was 50. He wrote a essay about arches. Whoop-de-frickin-do. I hope I'm doing more I hope I'm around when I'm 50, so I can be writing about some bridge, whether it has the big controversy is over whether it should have elliptical or semicircular arches. Big problem back then. Nothing else to worry about, I guess. Anyway, not my favorite part. Kind of annoying reading that. Fumbled around a lot, but it's done. Till next time, bye from Boswell.